So, welcome to the second in the series of Your Preparedness Journey. And today we're going to talk about risk assessment and contingency planning. So the things we're going to look at is we're going to provide you with an overview of the physical actions that you can actually carry out to identify any potential gaps in your oil spill preparedness and response measures, and then look at how we can develop plans to close those gaps in the future. Now, as everybody knows, the world's gone through a bit of turmoil over the past few years. What we tend to see as we visit our members and other operators around the globe is there's quite a change in personnel, in activities, in different operations that are going on in various locations. And because of that, we need to understand what we call the new normal is. So what or who we have available to be able to deal with any incident that we could potentially face. We're going to do this by splitting the assessment down into 5 different areas. First of all, we're going to look at the why. Why are we doing this in the first place? Why is it important for us to be prepared for an incident? We're going to look at what could happen, the what and the where that it could happen. We're going to look at who could be involved in responding to any incident. We're going to look at the when and the how. So how long do we have to deal with the incident on our own before additional resources can be mobilized and brought in to assist us? And then last but not least, we're going to revisit our initial assessment. So revisit the why we're doing this, see if there's improvements that we can make, see if there's any changes in technology that we can harness to make our response more efficient. So we're going to start with step 1, to discover your why. So this is where we're physically going to assess our oil spill risk. So the thing that we look at as we walk around our operations, and especially as we talk to our operators, is we look at the operations that we are currently undertaking. Are we loading vessels? Are we exploring offshore drilling? Are we doing logistical movement of product or oils? Whether that be by road, by train, by pipeline, we really want to understand, okay, what is it that we do? And I know that everybody who works in the oil and gas industry has, a good understanding of what goes on at their facilities or what operations they undertake. But really key to that is talking with our workforce, with the people who actually do the operation every day. Just discuss with them, the challenges that they face, the new people coming on board. We want to make sure that they understand exactly what it is that they are going to be asked to do. We look at things like our operational work instructions and our guidelines for carrying out these operations. We want to make sure that our operations are run as efficiently and effectively and as safely as possible. And then we're going to look at the potential environmental and socio-economic impacts. We talked about this a little bit in our previous webinar. But if you think about where we're operating in the world, the world is changing. Areas are getting more built up. For example, there's different operations, there's different organizations moving into various areas. And we'd really like to understand, okay, what is it that could be impacted if we have an incident? What's around us? So the environmental impact, as we know, that's things like your plants, your animals, your the general landscape around us, the natural landscape around us. So we have a look at what's around us, what could be impacted. And it's not necessarily immediately joining our facility. If we have, for example, facilities on a fast flowing river, for example, and there's a number of locations that we do our preparedness and response work in where the facilities are next to, a large river, and the river could have a flow rate of probably 3 or 4 knots. And what that means is if we do spill oil in that hour that it might take us to, prepare, especially overnight or when it's not our regular working hours, if it takes us an hour to mobilize our equipment and get to the location, the oil could have moved 3 or 4 miles away from the actual source point. So we have to expand our observation about what could be impacted and really identify those key areas, the key sensitive sites that could be impacted. We also look at the socioeconomic impacts. If everybody remembers a couple of years ago in the Suez Canal, that there was a large vessel that ran aground and effectively blocked the Suez Canal for a number of days. Now, the socio-economic impact of that was vast because that is a key logistical route for us. A lot of global transport moves through that canal. So those socio-economic impacts wasn't just, the canal itself. It had a huge knock-on effect to commerce on a global scale. And it's those kind of things that we have to be aware of. This won't be the first time that any organization has done a risk assessment. But what we're trying to do is we look at the risk assessment that we've got and we build upon it. We want to make sure that it's still valid. When we're talking about risk rating, everybody knows the term ALARP, A-L-A-R-P, which is as low as reasonably practical, or possible in some cases, but practical is the term that I hear more often. What we're trying to achieve is we are trying to make our operations as risk-free as possible. So the potential of a spill or any emergency incident is at an absolute minimum. Now, there's always going to be some inherent risk in everything that we do. However, if we examine those risks, we look at the operations that we are undertaking, we can make sure that we put measures in place to lower the potential of anything happening as much as possible. And again, I know that many organizations already have a risk assessment. And on top of that risk assessment, many operations already have some planned prevention and mitigation measures in place that will either reduce the likelihood of an incident occurring or the potential consequences resulting from a spill. I'm very sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to go back to my other screen just to make sure that everybody is. No, we've still got 9 people. So let's let those 9 people in as well. There we go. There we go. Okay, perfect. So we've already got planning in place to deal with our incident. Why isn't this letter? There we go. We've already got planning in place to deal with our incident. What we want to make sure is that planning still going to be effective? Things change, even from the legislation for the area that we're working in, all the way through to the capabilities of oil spill response organizations or our contractors who are working around us. we learn as we go through this process. We learn that our assumptions that we made initially are either correct and work well, or they're incorrect and need changing, or they're out of date. Now, the biggest one for us as an organization, All Spill Response, was the impact of the global pandemic that happened. Obviously, air travel or international travel was incredibly impacted. And the way All Spill Response is set up is we have these different response bases, surface and subsurface, key locations around the world. But we rely on the ability to move equipment from one country to the other, whether it's resources like technical advisors or your more traditional booms, skimmers, dispersants, subsurface intervention equipment. We want to be able to move that quickly and easily from one country to another. But like I said, with the cessation of international travel or easy international travel, that had a huge impact on us. So a lot of work was done. But okay, if our plan A doesn't work, what's our plan B, C, and D? And that's what I want you to take away from today as well. It's all very well to have a plan that says, in the best case, if everything works well, this is what will happen. But I want you to look at, okay, if our plan A doesn't work, what are we going to do next? If our initial All Spill Response organization, for example, is already engaged on another response, if our security level in the area that we operate changes, if it's now unsafe for us to go to a particular location, what are we going to do instead? And that's one of the key elements of the planning. We look at if our initial assumption is unachievable, what are we going to do instead? And then once we have all that information, we look at our risk rating again. Is our initial assumption still correct? Is our risk rating what we think it's going to be? Or do we need to do more? Do we need to plan for some other response operation to deal with what it is that we're facing? And once we have an idea of what it is that we can do to deal with this incident, then we start identifying those additional resources. So members of All Spill Response, for example, they have a very clear understanding, or at least I hope they have a very clear understanding of what services and support All Spill Response can provide to them, both prior to an incident happening and in the unlikely event that an incident does occur. But obviously, All Spill Response can't work in isolation. We do a lot, but we can't do everything. So we have to identify who else can we bring in to assist us. And this could be not only our response organizations, but also many of the support organizations that are out there. For example, if we want to bring dispersant into a country, let's say there's a potential of an incident, we've identified a number of response techniques that we could use and utilize, and one of those is the use of dispersant. We need to be sure that when we bring dispersant into that airport or port or however we bring it into the country, that the customs organization for that country is aware of what it is we're bringing in, of what it is we're going to be using it for, to be able to move it through that process as quickly as possible. Because any delay in that early stage of the response operation has a huge knock-on effect to how long we're going to be involved trying to deal with the incident itself or the ramifications of the incident itself. So that's step one. We're looking at our risks. We've looked at our operation. We've looked at what we do. We've looked at the region that we're operating in and what could be impacted if we do have an incident. We've looked at our current preparedness planning, our documentation, our teams, our on-site resources. We've looked at how utilizing them in the best way possible could mitigate the impact of any incident that we face. And then we look for improvements on how we can streamline moving that equipment, moving those resources, getting what we need to the location where it's needed. So our step 2 is the what and when of preparedness planning. And what we're talking about here is our documentation. Documentation is incredibly important. At its core, the documentation guides us through the decision-making process that we need to go through to be able to effectively and efficiently respond to an incident that we could face, any incident that we could face. Today, we're talking about oil spills, but there's so many potential incidents or hazardous occurrences that could be or could impact us. Fire, for example, civil unrest, a medical emergency, lots and lots of different emergencies, different incidents. So our organizations have plans to deal with this. So what we want to make sure the plans can be utilized as efficiently as possible by anybody who goes and picks the plan up and looks for it for guidance to be able to deal with the emergency that they're facing. Another thing that I've noticed personally going and visiting our members is we're starting to lose some of the more experienced people who used to work in the incident management teams, the management teams around the globe. They're either retiring or moving on to different areas. But what that means to us is our original planning documentation could rely very heavily on the experience of our personnel. If they've done this before, for example, they already have a good idea of, oh, I can call this person and they will do this for me. I can call that person and they will do this for me. But if you're new or relatively inexperienced to dealing with incidents, you're going to lean heavily on your documentation, your plans, your notification and mobilization procedures to make sure not only that you are making the right decisions, but also that the organizations, the companies that you are contacting are able to help you in the way that you think they are going to be. So that's second point, the roles and responsibilities or expectations for each of the response elements. It's very, very important for us to make sure that what we expect an organization to be able to do is actually what that organization is able to do. And obviously, one of the key ways we do this is through drills and exercises, where we contact the groups and we walk through their actual process from either mobilizing resources that we need for assisting us to deal with the incident that we face. And key to that is the way that we communicate with them. If we think about any incidents that we've been involved in the past, or drills and exercises that we've been involved in, the communication element is absolutely key to the effective outcome or the positive outcome of whatever it is that we're doing. We want to make sure that we are communicating correctly with the organization, that they understand exactly what it is we expect them to do, and we have a realistic time frame for them to do that. I'll give you an example. So I'm working in one of the Caribbean islands at the moment, assisting one of our members with their planning and preparedness procedures. The initial response for this location would come out of Fort Lauderdale in Florida, where we have a surface response base. Now, up until August this year, there used to be direct flights from Miami to the location. So it was relatively easy for us to get our team of technical advisors, the 5 for 5 service, where if you have an incident or the strong potential of an incident, we will send you 5 technical advisors free of charge to assist and help during those initial stages, those first 5 days. So whatever it is that you need us to do, we will do. So things like shoreline cleanup and assessment techniques, or engaging with the regulators or other oil spill response organizations in the area. But up to October this year, August this year, we could get people in there within 24 hours because of the flights. Now that's changed. It could be up to 72 hours before we can get people there without chartering an aircraft, obviously. So we have to look at, okay, if this organization has to survive basically on its own for 72 hours, what does that mean to them? How are they going to do that? What could we, Oil Spill Response, provide them remotely to help guide them through that early planning stage of any response before we can get people on the ground? And one of the ways we've identified that we can do that is we do more in-person visits during the planning phase. We're looking to build relationships. We're looking to build relationships not only with the organization itself, but also with the regulators, with other oil spill response organizations, with other operators in that region. So if there is an incident, we have a clear understanding of what it is that we could call upon and the organization could call upon to assist them during those early stages. So that's that last point. That has there been any changes in the legislative controls and approval requirements? This is especially important when we're talking about response strategies such as dispersant application or even in situ burning, for example. If there is a strategy that requires regulatory approval, we want to make sure that we understand that process prior to wanting to use it. The good thing about that is I've operated in, I think, 23 countries around the world now. There is not a regulator in place, in my experience, who is anti dealing with the incident. They want that incident to be cleaned up, to be managed, to go back to the normal operations as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, when we're talking about things like dispersant application and in situ burning, there could be some initial resistance. You know, they've read the CNN reports and they've seen the pictures on NBC and they've come up with an idea that dispersant use is bad or in situ burning is bad. And it's during this planning process that we get to have those discussions and say, this is why we want to use this response technique. And these are the benefits of using this response technique. And also because we like to be absolutely transparent. These are some of the hazards. And I think doing that, there's only been 2 countries in the world that have still said, no, you have to choose something else. We're not allowing dispersant application, for example. But that's good to know, believe it or not. I know it sounds like we're being handicapped in our response, but we're not, because it allows us to come up with our plan B, our plan C, our plan D about how we're going to deal with the incident that we could face. So that communication, that building relationships and incorporating that into our plans and documentation and notification and mobilization procedures is absolutely key. Because at the end of the day, we do not want the first time we have to engage within a group or an agency to be when we are under the stress of dealing with an emergency. We want to build that relationship beforehand during peacetime, for example. Okay, so now we're looking at the who. Who do we have available who can respond to the incident? And we can divide these up into the 2 teams. We've got our emergency response team. So these are the doers. These are the people that physically go out and respond to the incident. They're the people that carry out the surveys, the people that lay out the equipment, the people that do the vessel operations. Whatever it is that is an operational task, the emergency response team personnel are the people that do it. And then we have the incident management team. So these are obviously the people with the high level view of the potential impacts that could result of the emergency that we are dealing with. They are looking ahead. They are looking at what do the emergency response team need for the next operational period? Who else do we need to communicate with? Things like press releases, for example, dealing with the media, dealing with demonstrations, for example, from the population or whoever it is who would be impacted by the incident. So they have that high level view, our incident management team, and they keep that absolutely in focus for everything that they do, because that allows our emergency response team to get on with the activities needed to deal with the incident. So apologies for this slide. It is a bit messy, but just to recap, our emergency response team should be able to conduct a hazard assessment. What that means is before they do anything in any particular area, they're able to look at it and see what could happen to cause them harm. There have been a number of times in both drills, exercises, and actual events where we've had to rein in emergency response teams and make them take that 2 minutes, that 5 minutes, just to assess the location that they're going to be working in, to make sure that it's safe for them to go in. Now, there's been a number of incidents that I've been on where people have unfortunately passed away because they haven't done this. They haven't looked at what the potential hazards have been. Now, I've been doing this role for OSPA response now for almost 16 years. And I like to think of myself as someone who will take that 5 minutes, that step back and see, okay, what's the potential risks here before we dive on in? But a couple of years ago, I came back to my house and one of the bathrooms downstairs while I'd been out had flooded, and it had put a couple of inches of water through the whole base of the house. I opened the front door, the water started running out, And I waded straight in. I waded straight in looking for the source of the leak. And this is somebody who likes to think of themselves as experienced and knowledgeable in risk assessment, hazard assessment. I didn't think about turning off the power. I didn't think about anything else other than finding that leak. And it was a real wake-up call for me anyway, once I was in there, to think, well, this isn't a good idea. And what am I going to do about it? And tied into that is this establishing the site control. So that's making sure that on our operational site, on our response site, we are limiting the amount of personnel going into our hazardous area. Many areas that we operate in, we're not just dealing with the incident itself at a particular location. We could be dealing with interested bystanders, for example, that want to come down and have a look. We could be dealing with organizations, operations, and other companies who are trying to do their job, but can't because we've had this incident. And it's amazing the lengths that people will go to bypass a site control. The amount of times I've seen people duck under barrier tape or move signs and barriers across roads so they can drive through is probably uncountable. So we've got to make sure that wherever we're operating, we can control access to that location. And tied into that is our site safety and site management. We want to make sure that not only are all our response personnel on that location operating in the most safe way possible, we've also got to understand that they can't do this in isolation, that they need support to be able to do this. This could be anything from making sure that they've got enough PPE and the right equipment, but also rest areas, water, bathroom facilities, whatever it is that they need to make sure that they can carry out their work as effectively as possible. We also want to make sure that not only are the initial notifications very clear and the directions that we give to the team very clear, we want to make sure that there is a way that that team can communicate back to either the on-scene commander or the operations section in our incident management team to let them know of any changes, or even if the incident's going well or not well, to make sure that the incident management team have the most accurate and up-to-date information possible. And tied into that is this continuous risk evaluation and mitigation process. Situations change on operational sites. Simple things like a change in weather conditions, for example. It can be quite nice if we're working on a beach carrying out a shoreline cleanup and assessment, and the weathers are cool, 80 degrees, and there's a nice onshore breeze, and the sun's poking out from behind clouds. But especially in places like Texas, you wait 15 minutes and you're either boiling in your overalls or you're getting soaked wet with a very heavy rainstorm. So we want to understand that our operations can change quite quickly and have an understanding of what it is that we are going to do should that happen. And then we have our incident management team. Like I said, these are the management team with a high level view. And key to having that high level view is effective communications. So not only do they need to communicate effectively with our emergency response team, but with all the other elements of our response support network. So other oil spill organizations, our logistics suppliers, our regulators, whoever it is we've identified who can assist us, we want to have a clear way of communicating with them. Key to that as well is our incident objectives. We all have to be working towards a common goal. And this common goal has to be agreed upon as much as possible during that initial stage of the response by everyone. We've only got a finite amount of resources that we can call upon, especially during those early stages. So we want to make sure that everybody is working together. Part of that as well, obviously, is the notifications. Once it becomes apparent to us that we do need these additional resources, we need a clear way of letting those organizations know. So those notifications, those liaising with partners, how are we going to work with the different groups in order to deal with the incident that we face? And then there's other things that are very important, the media response plan, the flow of information, making sure that we are putting out a unified message about what's happening and what we're doing about it. Also, they need to understand where we can get more advice from. So the technical and functional support element. And this could be anything. This could be equipment based for the subsurface response, for example, or it could be environmental based. Who are we going to reach out to understand, hey, at this time of year in this location, these sensitive resources are likely to be effective. How can we deal with them? And then last but not least, this ensure integrity, good grief, I can't even say it. Ensure integrity of the process during incidents by making corrective actions. So what do we mean by that sentence? We want to make sure that we are flexible enough to change direction during a response operation to make sure that we are being as effective as possible with the resources available to us. Now, step 4, the when and the how. So this really ties into the emergency response teams. So during those initial stages, how long is it going to take resources to mobilize, and how are they going to mobilize? How are they going to get to us? I think it's worth at this point going through the different tiers and how we classify oil spill response operations. So tier 1 is an incident that occurs that we can deal with the resources immediately available to us on site. So that's the personnel and any response equipment that we have. Typically, tier 1 incidents last one operational period. They tend to be relatively small, but having said that, in my history with oil spill response, we've responded to a oil spill incident of 10 litres, which is probably about 3 gallons, almost 4 gallons, that in a particular location, and the response has taken a week. And we've been under massive scrutiny because of the area that it occurred. And then again, there's been an incident of, I think it was around 15,000 litres. So that's about 5,000 gallons, shall we say, where the response was very, very simple because of the location and because of the product. And it only lasted actually 2 operational periods before the incident was no longer an issue. So our tier 1 incidents are based upon the product that we're dealing with, the incident that could happen, and our resources immediately available to us. Now, the next level up, our tier 2, this is where we're going to utilize everything that we have on site, but also call in additional resources that are relatively quick to arrive on site. So they'll typically be able to mobilize during that first operational period. These could be identified contractors that we have, that we know, to be able to call in, that they can mobilize their equipment, get to our location, they have trained personnel, and they can start working to mitigate that incident as quickly as possible. These incidents can last anywhere from the 2 to about 7 operational periods, so approximately a week, using the resources that are immediately available. And then last but not least, we've got tier 3. So these are the large scale incidents. And actually, when I talk about large scale incidents, I don't mean the amount of product spilt. I mean the amount of response resources needed to deal with it. So that's dependent on location, on product type, on time of year. You know, there's so many different elements that go into classifying these incidents. But the tier 3 is where we're calling in as many resources as we possibly need. And it could be that we require specialist resources. And in that case, it could be mobilizing an international response organization such as Allspa Response to bring in those resources that we need. I will give a little plug for Allspa Response here. One of the good things about our organization is we don't mind what tier level you're classifying your incident as. If you have a tier 1 incident, but you feel, I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing here, you can call our duty managers. They will give you advice over the telephone or remotely. We'll also mobilize that 5 for 5 technical advisor service for you, where you can have up to 5 people free of charge for 5 days, just to make sure that whatever it is that you are facing, that you are dealing with it as efficiently and effectively as possible. One of the things you will see in planning documentation are these different tiers. And then last but not least, we're going to look at revisiting your why, maintaining your response readiness. So we've gone through this process once. We've identified what will happen. We've identified what could be impacted. We've identified the resources that we have available to us to deal with the incident. We've looked at how we're going to mobilize these resources, how long they're going to take to get to us, and what it is we want them to do once they're there. But so far, it could be that we've done that in isolation. One of the things that I do is I write preparedness and response plans, sat in an office in Houston. And it could be I'm writing for a plan for a facility in Argentina, for example. Now, I can have a reasonable understanding of their operations based upon the information that they've given me. But it's not until I actually go on site and we practice responding to an incident. We examine the planning that I've done and the assumptions that I've made to make sure that they stand the test of being used in the real world. So this is the absolute key step in this whole process. Regular drills, exercises, and competency training. It's a term that we hear bandied around all the time. And actually this time of year for us in All Spill Response is very busy with people doing their annual all spill drills, making sure that their assumptions for the year are still correct. that what they think is going to happen are still going to happen. And one of the benefits of having modern technology on our side now is we can really harness it to make these exercises as realistic as possible. So that's a step beyond just choosing a good scenario that we're responding to. We also get to throw in the challenges that we've experienced. We get to throw in supporting information such as oil spill modeling for the actual day of the event. We get to look at things like key logistics routes. I did a response in Trinidad a couple of years ago now, where initially we believed the equipment was going to come into the airport and then mobilized from the airport to the location, to the port, and then moved out. But it just so happened that the main road from Port of Spain out to the port area was undergoing some quite major road repairs, which meant that we couldn't take that initial route with the equipment that we thought we were going to mobilize. So we had to come up with a second plan. It actually involved breaking down the equipment, putting it on smaller vehicles and moving it a different way. But obviously that had a huge impact to time. So what knock-on effect did that have to the overall response? So as part of that, it's very key that your response people understand what it is that they could be asked to do. Oil spills very rarely happen at 10 to 9 on a Tuesday morning in nice dry weather. In my experience, they always happen over holidays or overnight, or when an operation is down-manned for some maintenance issue or something like that, where our regular support infrastructure just isn't available. And because of that, it's very important for us to ask ourselves these questions. And the questions are, once we get notified that there has been an incident, what are we going to do first? I'll give you another story from the life of Tristan. So I was military for many years, been oil spill response for many years. I've worked in the emergency preparedness. I'm first aid trained. Oh, you name it, I've got a certificate for it, probably even ballroom dancing somewhere. I was at a gas station in Houston, well, actually just outside Houston, about 6 months ago now, and filled up my car, and there was a person walking around the gas station, a person of interest, just marked them out, hey, I should keep an eye on them. And they were approaching different vehicles. And I went into the store, brought my cigarettes, I opened the door, and I took 2 steps out, and there was a gunshot. Now, it's not the first time I've heard gunshots. It's not the first time I've had to deal with a first aid casualty. But my initial response was to stand there and look around. I was frozen. I wasn't expecting it. And it felt like 5 minutes. It's probably 15 to 20 seconds. And what jerked me out of my reverie was a car peeled out of the service station. And then when I ran over, there was a person who'd been shot in the head, and we had to do first aid and all that fun stuff. But what I'm trying to get over to you by that story is that we all think how we're going to behave when an incident occurs. But there's a saying that we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of our training, which is why it's really important for us to have a very, very good understanding of what it is we're going to do when we receive that call, when we receive that notification of, hey, there's been an incident. What is it that we're going to do? What your role would be in that spill incident? What you could be called upon to do? It's also very important for us to understand where we fit into that overall management or response team structure. Who are we reporting to? Who's going to give us our orders of what they want us to achieve? And who can we tell if we have ideas or guidance or more information about what is actually going on? Because what tends to happen during those early stages of an incident is we're getting information from multiple locations, and we could get multiple requests to do certain things. We just can't achieve everything. It has to be very clear, the understanding of who's going to tell us or give us our goal to achieve and who we are reporting to give that feedback on how well that operation or whatever task we've been given to do is going. Now, hopefully, all organizations have plans and procedures in place that will detail these different roles and responsibilities, even if it's just in general terms. We've got a lot better over the years since COVID, but there's still exercises, drills, and even incidents that I go on where I never see a document brought out. Now, that can work. If you have experienced personnel that have done this before, that understand what it is they're trying to achieve, that can work very well. But what happens when those people aren't available? What happens if we find ourselves in a role that we are not used to? There are guides available to us that we can refer to make sure that we are carrying out whatever task we're given as effectively as possible. And there's always an opportunity for us to learn more. There's always an opportunity for us to engage with the other members of our team to see what else they are doing and what else we can do to assist them and help. So these are some of the pictures from drills and the exercises that we do, for example. I'm sorry about the top right where I just seem to be yelling at people, but here we do multiple phase exercises where we have our response team personnel and then we have our incident management team personnel. We tie those two elements together to make sure that that communication between the groups runs as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Because at the end of the day, it's the communication element that we live or die by. But the good thing is you're not on your own when you are looking to start planning for your emergencies. There are a number of support systems out there to help you. And again, apologies for this blatant advert for All-Spill Response, but All-Spill Response is one of them. On our website, we have self-assessment tools, simple traffic light guides. Green, yes, we feel like we've got that covered. Amber, well, I think we could do a bit better. Red, we haven't thought about that at all. It's something that we might have to look at. And then drill and exercise support, where we can help you not only design and develop your drills and exercises to meet the goals that you face, but also provide people either in a technical advisor role or in a, I hate to use the word inspection, but more of a coordination role to make sure everybody understands what it is they're doing and have the resources available to them to be able to do that. We also deliver a range of training, either remotely or in person. We have published courses where we hold them at our response bases that you can come to us, use all our equipment. The good thing about that is you don't have to clean it afterwards. and you get access to a lot of our support personnel, or client tailored training where we come to you and we use your equipment in the area that you could potentially be using it. Another thing we do is capability reviews. It could be that you have a system already in place, that you're doing your drills and exercises, you feel that everybody's trained, but you want to make sure that, am I doing the best? Are there other organizations around the world that have a different way of doing this? And this is where Allspill Response's capability reviews can really help. We've visited multiple people, multiple operations in different parts of the globe. So we know what works, what's the best practice that different organizations are doing. And is there a way that we could transplant that information from this location to your location? And our capability review really helps us do that. And then last but not least, we have our contingency plans. We can either develop a contingency plan for you, or we can look at your current plans and make suggestions, give advice about how they can be approved, especially in the areas of oil spill modeling, risk assessments, environmental sensitivity, and wildlife response. Okay. We are always available to you. I have a minute left, so that was perfectly timed, despite the little bit of trouble at the start. We are always available to you, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call us on our emergency numbers if you have an incident or the potential of an incident. You can also email us. So up there on the screens now is my personal work email, Tristan Barston at Allspill Response. The Houston Technical Office is where I'm located, where we have 4 people now actually, who have the technical support and advice that we can provide you. And then we also have our duty managers, our response bases. So these are people with multiple years experience of responding to incidents around the globe. And the good thing about Allspill Response, we are 320 something people strong on a global basis. If the duty manager hasn't had experience of the operation of the incident that you're facing, there's a high likelihood that we have somebody in our organization who does. And we can call upon that expertise to make sure that we give you the most accurate, up-to-date, and useful advice possible. Well, thank you very much for attending today's webinar. This webinar has been recorded. It will be available on our website. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to contact me or the duty managers or our general email, and we'd be more than happy to help. Now, I'm going to exit this screen now and go back to my Teams. Tricia, I'm very sorry I didn't let you in, but if anybody's got any questions, I'm very sorry that you can see my screen. But if anybody's got any questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them, even though we're slightly overrun. If you don't, that's fine too. No, I think we're good. All right, perfect. Well, if 5 minutes after this, we do have a hand up. It's Lynn Tricia. There we go. If anybody does have a question and 5 minutes later they think, oh, you know what, I wish I'd asked that, please feel free to drop me an email, give me a call, or my contact details are available on the Allspill Response Limited website, and we would be more than happy to help. Other than that, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all again for the third webinar in this series, which will happen next month, I believe.